landed on the sloping beach at Normandy. They nosed into the short, steep shore of Bougainville. They were at New Guinea and Salerno. They're in every attack we make. The LSTs, landing ship tank. They land tanks, sure, and trucks and tractors and dozers and guns. Out of the LSTs, the heavy stuff can move across the beaches to reinforce the men against the fire, against the enemy. These are the ships we want you to learn about. These are the ships we'll show you. But they won't all be the same. Some will be like those that landed at Sicily. Some will be newer and different, like the ones that hit Saipan. Others you'll see have not yet been in action. These have been changed and improved even more. But whether the LSTs are in the harbor or at sea, loaded with cargo or with decks cleared, let's find out how they're designed, what they carry, and why they are a part of every landing attack. And let's begin with this model built to scale. This, then, is the LST, a ship that is made to carry cargo. She can carry plenty of it because she's long, about 328 feet. And she's wide. Her beam is approximately 50 feet. And she displaces 4,000 tons. Here are the twin propellers, powered by 2 diesel engines, and with twin rudders for control, they drive the LST up on the beach. But it's the design of the hull that lets her lie there. The beaching draft aft is 9 feet 10 inches, while the forward beaching draft is only 3 feet and 4 inches. This drag of 6.5 feet enables the LST to move up on any beach that slopes at least 1 foot every 50 feet. The broad, flat, keelless bottom lets the ship rest there firmly, while the high freeboard of 15.5 feet prevents heavy seas from breaking over the stern as the ship is unloading her cargo from the bow. Here are the best-known features of the LST: the bow doors and the ramp. When the ship is cruising, the bow doors are a cutwater, decreasing water resistance and making the handling easier. When the ship has beached, the bow doors open, and the tanks inside can move down the ramp and out on the beach. She'll hold plenty of those tanks the way she's designed. So let's take a look at her distribution of space. We can start with the main deck at the bow. Here are the bow guns. We'll tell you more about them a little later. Up here, too, is the bow anchor with its capstan port side. And the towing cable is in the center of the forecastle. Now let's move aft. The elevator is next with its forward winch that hoists cargo up to this broad main deck. Around the elevator are 3 of the ship's ventilators and fans. Together with 37 air intakes, they keep the tank deck below supplied with fresh air. Farther aft, the cargo hatch. And then, the navigation bridge. More guns are here. And while it isn't on this model, the conning tower is here with the signal bridge aft. Small utility boats on their davits are either side of the bridge. And officers' country is below it. The quarters for the crew are aft in the fantail. And on the stern are more guns and the retraction gear, the anchor and the cable used to pull the ship free of the beach. Okay, you've seen the main deck, which carries its quota of cargo. Below it is the tank deck that is built to hold the heavy cargo, the mechanized vehicles of war. And on either side of the ship, between the 2 decks, are quarters where troops can sleep and eat. The troops who come aboard the LST to man those heavy vehicles. This should give you some idea of what an LST looks like. Now we'll give you a better idea. We'll show you a real one in dry dock. We said the LST had a flat bottom. Well, we weren't kidding. It's flat all the way from the bow to the stern. Now look at the propellers and the rudders. Close to the bottom like this, they could be damaged when the ship runs up on the beach. So each is protected by a skeg. And to keep the anchor cable from fouling, these guards have been placed above the propellers, either side of the stern. With each propeller powered by a 900 horsepower engine, the LST has a flank speed of 10 knots and an economic speed of 9 knots. Now that we have her underway, this is a good time to look again at the navigation bridge. Here it is, with the new high conning tower. From here, you have an unobstructed view of the ship and the sea. Below this new type conning tower, foul weather gear is stowed, so that the men on the bridge deck can easily obtain it when the weather is heavy. The signal bridge is also aft of the con. And on the bridge deck itself, the radio shack, the chart room, the room for decoding and degaussing, and at the forward end, the wheelhouse. Not all the LSTs will have the new conning tower, but they all have a complement of small boats. On this ship, there are two, one port and one starboard, slung on gravity davits and falls that can be raised or lowered by the boat fall's motor. But to raise the davits the last few feet, the winch must be operated by a crank by hand. To engage the crank, you have to open this new safety switch. When the switch is opened like this, electricity to the motor is cut off and it will not run. Thus, there is no danger of the motor spinning the crank and hurting anyone. Now let's leave the bridge and go to the forward part of the ship. Directly forward of the bridge is the cargo hatch that opens into the tank deck. Also on the main deck are the air intakes. When these are open, fresh air can flow down into the tank deck. With the tank deck empty, this isn't so important. But if the deck is loaded with vehicles and the ramp is closed, carbon monoxide fumes from the motors can quickly fill this space and make it dangerous. How do you get those poisonous fumes out? Come into the control room that overlooks this tank deck. In this room are switches that control the ventilator fans in the overhead. When these fans are working, the fumes are sucked up and out through the ventilators to the main deck, where they disappear in the open air. Now let's have a look at the elevator that connects the main deck with the tank deck. When the tank deck is clear of cargo and elevator guides are set in place, the powerful elevator winch can be used to lower cargo or hoist it between the two decks. On some ships, this elevator has been replaced by a movable ramp. The elevator winch, being forward, has another use. For at either end are gypsy heads that are used to heave in lines when warping ship. Even more forward, well up on the bow, is the capstan that hoists the bow anchor. Here it is, on the port bow, a regular ship's anchor. There is a different anchor at the stern. This one is used for retraction. This anchor and 900 feet of galvanized cable that runs up through the fair lead to the anchor engine on the stern. The engine, developing a 100,000-pound pull, takes up on this cable to pull the LST off the beach. Let's follow a ship as she goes into shore and see how this retraction gear works. From the bridge, the order comes, let go stern anchor. The brake is released. The engine control is set to pay out, and down she goes. As the ship moves into beach, the cable is paid out, as much of the 900 feet as is necessary to let the LST move in to make a landing, to unload its cargo and its troops on the shore. When the decks have been cleared of cargo and the ship is ready to retract, the anchor engine is put in heaving condition. The cable is taken up until the line, held firmly by the stern anchor, is taut. Then, as the anchor engine continues taking up on the line, the ship is slowly pulled seaward. The propellers aid in retraction until the ship is clear of the beach. As soon as the propellers can handle the ship alone, the anchor is heaved in and hoisted to the guardrail. Then, by means of the anchor housing strap, the anchor is secured. Just aft of the navigation bridge is the spare propeller stowage, in case you've damaged one of the propellers. And extra anchor cable is carried, too. With cargo unloaded and back to sea, you have to trim ship. That takes us down in the engine room. Here you find the ballast pumps and valves to the ballast tank lines. These valves permit the tanks to be controlled separately so that the ballast can be shifted to give the ship stability, whether on the beach or at sea. And down in the hold are the storage tanks that carry 120,000 gallons of fresh water and 186,000 gallons of fuel oil. On this fuel, the LST can cruise 15,000 miles at 8 knots. To handle her, she has a crew of 104 men and 7 officers. Let's take a look at the officers while they work at their stations aboard the ship. We'll start in the conning tower. Here is the nerve center of the ship. So here we find the commanding officer, where he can control his LST. On the signal bridge aft of the conning tower is the communication officer. Below the conning tower in the wheelhouse is the executive officer, the navigator of the ship, the gunnery officer, in charge of the ship's complement of guns. The ship's supply officer is at his station on the stern, for he is in charge of the stern detail. This is the engineer, who controls the powerful engines. And finally, the first lieutenant, the officer in charge of loading and unloading the all-important cargo. In line with this duty of loading tanks, he is billeting officer for the troops. The troops who come aboard to run the tanks and trucks and tractors. They have quarters in the sides of the ship that can accommodate 165 men and 20 officers. And naturally, most important, a galley. Well, you can see that an LST, when she's loaded with troops and tanks and the men who operate her, is a pretty valuable ship. Well worth protecting, which means guns. The LST carries a complement of 20s and 40s for her own protection. On the older ships, they are singles. Look here on the forward deck of this LST. On the starboard is a single 40 millimeter. Farther forward, a 20. The bow gun is another single 40. Port side of that is another 20. And then a single 40 again. Altogether, there are 7 single 40s and 12 20s on this ship. On new ships, the firepower has been changed. On a modern LST, the bow gun is a twin 40 with a director. With this director, the bow gun can send deadly accurate fire faster than ever before. A director has also been installed at the stern to control the new twin 40 stern gun. But the twin 40 and director are not the only improvement at the stern. New LSTs have armored ammunition magazines beneath the stern guns. With these new magazines on the stern, ammo can be supplied to the guns as rapidly as it's needed. Speaking of protective equipment, this is a fog generator. In this generator, oil is mixed with water to form a heavy kind of smoke. Under that smoke, the LST can conceal itself. The fog generator oil is stored in drums under the stern gun platform. And if the ship should ever catch fire, the 6 seafoam generators go to work. Each one mixes salt water with seafoam to form a substance that smothers flames like a blanket. This generator is beside the towing cable on the forecastle forward. These, then, are the LSTs, their characteristics and their crews. Now we want to show you the cargo they can carry. The ships can be loaded from the beach. Up the ramps and into the LSTs can go tanks, trucks, half-tracks, dozers, heavy vehicles that can be driven into the LST right from the shore. The ship can be loaded with some vehicles while she is still at sea. Amphibious tractors, the LVTs, can move through the water and crawl up on the ramp. Amphibious trucks can load this way too, from the water. Or they can drive into the tank deck when the LST is docked. And with the LST at the pier like this, light general cargo can be stowed aboard, on the tank deck, or taken up on the elevator to the main deck, where the lighter vehicles usually are stowed. On both decks, cargo must be well secured because the LST has a very short interval of roll, only about 6 seconds, and a tank that is not secured like this could cause a lot of trouble at sea. This tank deck carries a heavy load. It holds 10 heavy tanks, or 20 medium tanks, or 39 light tanks. In place of tanks, the deck will carry 33 2.5-ton trucks, or 17 ducks, or 17 LVTs. Incidentally, if the LST has a ramp between the tank deck and the main deck, the amphibious tractors can be stowed on the main deck too. But the LSTs hold more than vehicles. On the main deck, an entire LCT can be carried. The LCT is launched directly from the deck into the water. Then it can be loaded with heavy cargo from the bow of the larger landing ship. Another way of transporting these landing craft for tanks is to carry them in sections. In this way, an LST can carry 1 1/3 or 1 2/3 of LCTs, depending on the deck space available. These sections, which are watertight, can be lowered into the water and then assembled quickly and put to use. Finally, the LST can carry pontoons lashed to its sides. When these are floated to the bow, they make a bridge to shore, and cargo can hit a beach which would otherwise be out of reach. It doesn't matter if the beach is steep or shallow, ringed by reef, or facing the open sea. The LSTs will find a way to carry out their job. They carry tanks, sure. They were built for that. But not just tanks alone. For out of the doors of the LSTs pour as many weapons, as much equipment as it takes to supply our men who must fight on the enemy's beach.